Hi, and welcome back to Gallery Talks with Craig. I'm sculptor Craig Frederick. Today I'm in my studio, and this is episode 7 titled The Making of Variant, a hammered and fabricated bronze sculpture. Variant is a memorial, a story of division and its role in both growth and destruction. She stands as a reminder that while beauty can heal and inspire, it can also disguise that which is dark and dangerous. I created Variant in response to political and social divisions, the beautiful yet trying dynamics of family, the heroic rising to power of the feminine, and for those regarded as different, my fellow variants. Each of these is related to the concept of division. As a nature lover, the image of cytokinesis, a stage of cell division, represented for me the symbolic moment of division's potential. Growth by dividing one into two, complicated by the occurrence of mutations. Mutations that can propel evolution forward by advancing life or cause the destruction of life. In 1994, and long before I started to think about this concept, I started to hammer the first bronze section of the piece. After hammering for a few months on the dominant surface of what would become Variant's bottom form, I had to abandon the effort. The metal resisted all of my attempts to stretch it into the desired form. I was stumped and I had more to learn. Since then, I've had the form perched in my studio to provoke me. It is typical for me to solve sculpture problems while sleeping, so finally, in the summer of 2019, I awoke with clarity as to where the metal needed to be struck by my hammer. I was confident this would create a new tension by releasing another and result in the form I long ago desired but could not achieve. It worked and I moved full steam ahead, working in the studio 6 to 7 days a week. This was well before we knew about COVID-19. I first disclosed the concept and title of Variant on social media months prior to the news of the virus. In stark contrast to evolutionary improvements to life, the virus will forever be a dark and devastating example of the potentially destructive powers of division and mutation. Ironically, the isolation the pandemic demanded provided me with the uninterrupted time and space I needed to focus on the work of creating Variant. This episode is an attempt to cull over 350 photos and videos I shot throughout the making of Variant into a cohesive presentation describing the various steps along the way. I hope it gives you an understanding of the work involved and why I choose such a demanding and labor-intensive constructivist method of making sculpture. Using inexpensive materials such as plaster, I start by mocking up facsimiles to the desired individual sections of the sculpture, which give me three-dimensional surfaces from which I can make aluminum lath or masking tape templates. I use these templates to determine the shapes I need to cut out of the flat 1/8 inch thick silicon bronze plate. What I'm doing now is I'm creating a template for the top portion of the piece. What I have here is a plaster model of a surface that I wanted. And on top of that, I've laid masking tape passing in opposite directions in about 3-4 layers in some places. And I'm trimming the edges right now. So what that does for me is the masking tape template, when I pull it off and then I put it down in the flat on the bronze plate, it's going to show me two things. It's going to show me the shape to cut out of the flat, but where the masking tape bunches up, where it doesn't want to go flat, is where the metal is going to have to be stretched. And so that gives me a lot of information about how to work the metal. Now, there's a much faster way of doing this on the computer, but I'm not interested in speeding up my process. And I want my hands to get to know the surface. And laying the masking tape up, I get a lot of information. It's an intimate relationship with the surface. And then I take that information into the hammering process. It gives me a better idea of where the forces need to be stretched and lengthened and compressed and shortened. And it's that relationship of those two things that creates the form and takes it into the shape like this. So, all right, as you can see, my second piece, it's going to go above this piece. It's actually going to be similar to that, only inverted, going in the opposite direction and a little bit smaller. And to get that shape, which is called a saddle curve, curving this way and that way, as I've been talking about, we have to lengthen that and lengthen that. Let me show you real quickly what I mean. So this is what that bronze looks like in flat plate, and it's 1/8 inch thick, and it's pretty rigid stuff. But say for grins that this is bronze plate, and I want it to go into a saddle form. So what I have to do is I have to stretch this side and this side, and then watch what happens. So I stretch that side and I stretch this side, and you can see what's happening is it's starting to go into this saddle curve and actually compress the center spine a little bit. And just a real quick demonstration of how the metal works. So it's a misconception that what you do when you're hammering is that you're forming it and bending it. You're not. The form and the bending happens as a result of the forces that you create by stretching and lengthening sides, which thins it, and compressing and thickening areas. And those combined forces is why it goes into these forms. That's the sole reason why I go through this very laborious process, because everything that we know of, every form that you can think of on Earth and throughout the universe happens because of a relationship of forces, so conflicting forces and cooperating forces. So hammering bronze, the craft of hammering bronze, is synonymous with my conceptual concerns that I'm going after in my art, and to have those two things related is pretty great. And real quickly, I will just demonstrate a little bit of hammering. These hammers and what we call stakes are custom made. I copied from my mentor, Bob Ingman. Copied his hammers and stakes, which he custom made, and copied from Jose de Rivera, a very famous artist. And we made copies in wood, and then we had them cast at an enormous Pennsylvania steel foundry. So here on the anvil, this is where I would do some of the hammering. And as you can see, I'm going to use this side, this peen right here, and stretch like that. So I'm just going to do a couple of hits here to show you. And what happens is over time, the metal work hardens. And what that means is it becomes very brittle and resistant to change. So that's where you use a torch, and you have to heat it up cherry red hot and then let it cool. What that does is it's called annealing. It relaxes all the molecules. You think of when you bend a paper clip a lot, your work hardening, it becomes brittle and it snaps. So you have to anneal, let it cool, and then hammer it again, because you cannot hammer bronze hot. That's called forging. And bronze, because of the makeup of it, if you were to hammer it hot, it would fall apart and break on you. So you have to hammer cold till it work hardens, anneal it, and then start again. The total process will be a couple hundred hours to get this form where I want it to be. All right, so that's a quick little lesson, an explanation about what I'm doing here. A distinct design feature to Variant is the appearance of segmentation. I first introduced this design element many years ago when creating a sculpture titled Crustacean Dream 1. It gives a sense of form resulting from the lengthening of one side of an exoskeleton, a conceptual example of the relationship of forces required in the hammering of bronze. I used it again in a related piece titled Defending the Fleece. To achieve the appearance of segmentation and variant, I fabricated 36 unique pieces of bronze. For each segment, I made a template, transferred the template shape to a piece of bronze plate, cut the shape out, hammered the segment into the desired form, trimmed it for a precise fit, and welded the segment to the main form. To further enhance the sense of expansion, I created large textural welds between each segment. Evidence of the outer edge welds is eventually removed with files. This piece segment is hammered properly at this point, but it needs to be trimmed so that the edges meet perfectly. Now, normally I'd wear gloves because the bronze gets very hot during this process, but I'm just going to do a little bit here to show you. So I'm going to look at this line right here. So it's getting a little too hot to hold now. Bronze is a copper alloy, so it sinks heat really well. What that means is it conducts the heat through the metal really fast, really quickly. So I do an approximation, and then I go back to the piece, and this fitting process involves many trips back and forth, little tiny tweaks here and there, until I get it to fit exactly where I need it prior to the welding. I use what's called a TIG welder. It stands for tungsten inert gas. It's an electrical arc form of welding, which means it doesn't use any flame. It uses electricity, and it creates an arc at the point where you want to weld. The torch has a tungsten tip to it. That's one of the electrodes. The other electrode is clamped to the metal table. And because the bronze is in contact with the metal table, the current will go through it, and then when I hit a pedal down here, it's what's called a rheostat pedal, it'll create the arc right where the torch is. And this is a rod of filler metal. It's the exact same alloy as this metal. They're both silicon bronze. So the intense arc melts the metal at the point where I'm welding, and I introduce the filler metal, which also melts, and it connects the two together. So let's give this a try. Right now I'm just creating what I call tack welds, certain points to secure it. Once that's done, I get to take off all the clamps and then weld the beads. Things about welding a sculpture like this that's undulating all over the place is the big trick is the setup, and then in moving around it, you get in some pretty awkward positions. Progression of the segment work is put on hold to accommodate necessary interior work for key components of Variant. Fabricating the top cap and installing a mounting mechanism for the proboscis are next. A template for the cap is made and a hole is drilled through which the proboscis will emerge. Hammering raises the edges of the hole to give it an inward dimple. The cap is fitted and welded in place, after which the edge welds are ground and filed. Constructed from bronze scrap, a 4-part mechanism consisting of 2 lateral guides, a through guide, and a locking mount makes the installation of the proboscis simple, secure, and consistently oriented. A lot of the fabrication work and hammering and all of the steps that precede where I am now need to be done in a way so that I'm able to refine the work to be what it wants to be. There's other ways of saying that, but they're not quite right. You know, like taking the metal and the seams and the surfaces and the edges to their nth degree and things of that nature. But, you know, if I had the right words, I'd be a poet, and I don't. Form is what I understand. Form is what inspires me, always has. It's where I find my answers. So what I'm doing now is on this part terminus that I've been calling the proboscis, where I've formed these stainless steel rods of various diameters, welded them together, is I'm carving the stainless steel welds. So there's really no more evidence of them being welds, and it all looks like it's one thing growing out of itself. You can't use rotary tools like this, and you know, this tool's out here because I always come back and I say, oh, maybe I could, you know, rush that a little bit and, you know, get in there with a Dremel or something or a die grinder. It'd work, and it never works because the rotary tools have only a single tangent point, and there's no way of truing or fairing surfaces with a single tangent point. So flat files of various sizes and types and shapes, cross-sectional shapes, are what I use. And so this is what it looks like, and you know, I'll just show you a little bit. So I do this for hundreds of hours, and you know, everybody says, wow, you must have so much patience. I have very little patience. You only need patience if your goal is to finish the piece, and that's not why I work. The process, the things that change along the way, the things I discover and learn along the way, that's the motivation. And so speeding that up or finishing that more quickly doesn't do anything for me. And this is what I do. It may seem strange to most people, but this is the life I live. And as I said, if I had words, I'd be a poet. I don't. This is my poetry. So you can see that little edge of stainless steel weld that's still apparent in there. What I'm doing is I'm trying to bring the surface on the high side down to the level of the surface on the low side so that it'll all look continuous. And that could take the better part of my day. So that's what this is all about. As you have just seen, sculpture often requires problem solving with practical solutions. Another more common example of this is engineering how a particular sculpture is secured to a base without disrupting how the art is perceived. Later, I will address that while describing the fabrication of variance foot. For now, the most important part of this sculpture demands my attention to create a solid marriage of practical and artistic solutions. As I've discussed in previous episodes, relationships and the spaces between are what fascinate me the most. All divisions, the very inspiration for variant, are defined by these, hence how variant's top and bottom forms meet is critical, requiring intentional design solutions. The design issues are conceptual, formal, and practical. In this situation, a good practical solution makes the conceptual and formal solutions possible. Fabricating the top form segments to meet the already established bottom form in a manner consistent with my conceptual and formal design needs requires a keyable support system. This allows me to repeatedly assemble and disassemble the top and bottom without altering the juxtaposition of either. An internal spine fabricated out of stainless tubing and 2 pieces of stainless rod proves to work well. As the 2 rods are able to securely slide in and out of either end of the tubing, I can make temporary adjustments to the z-axis, which is the distance between the 2 forms, without changing the x and y axes of either form. Another solution I solved in my sleep. Establishing and securing the alignment of the spine to the top and bottom forms comes first. I drill a hole in the bottom form at the center where the top and bottom forms will meet, followed by inserting the spine through the hole. To fix the X and Y axes in place, I weld the bottom and the top rods to the insides of the bottom and top forms respectively. Carefully supporting both forms on the welding table prevents any rotational changes. Now that I can gently disassemble and reassemble both forms, I begin hammering and fabricating the top form segments to intersect seamlessly with the bottom form. My conceptual design is for the larger bottom form to appear as though it is pushing into the smaller and seemingly softer top form. To accomplish this, my formal design is to hammer 3 top segment sections that start as convex forms before turning inward as concave forms. The concave section of each top segment must also meet the bottom form as complementary 3-axis surfaces, which are slightly dished forms. Ironically, but intentionally, the most challenging bit of sculpting in over 3 decades of work will largely go unnoticed. An example of what I refer to as the complexity of simplicity. After the 3 segment sections of the top form are fabricated and meeting the bottom form properly, I permanently secure the top and bottom sections of Variant by welding them together on the interior, thereby leaving no visible means of connection on the exterior of the sculpture. Now that Variant is forever structurally one, I'm able to finish the remaining segments and begin filing. Except for Variant's foot and base, all fabrication is now complete. The next stage of work is to file and sand the sculpture in select areas. I'm choosing to refine all edges and their immediate adjacent surfaces with files and some light sanding, while leaving a graduation of file marks and hammering textures towards the center of the forms. At the top and bottom where the sculpture decreases in size, I file across the entire form using greater surface refinement. A rich texture is left by filing in crisscrossing directions, which is also a good technique for fairing form. From time to time, I stop to examine the surfaces with my sense of touch and by looking across the forms. In choosing to work with hand files instead of power or pneumatic tools, I can more accurately control the surface form and textures, which is why it is almost always my preference, regardless of how much longer it takes. With filing done, it is time to fabricate Variant's foot. I first find the sculpture's mechanical balance by establishing its center of gravity. Doing so gives what is in abstract form a sense of figurative gesture and energy. Once the piece is securely held to the welding table in its balanced orientation, I determine the shape for the final piece of bronze that will enclose the foot. I have cut, drilled, and tapped a spare chunk of bronze and welded it to the inside of the foot. A threaded stainless steel rod will be screwed into this and secured to the base. All evidence of exterior welding is filed away, leaving a refined and continuous form. Variant is now able to freely stand on her own without added counterbalancing or being secured in any way. The balance is achieved solely by the gesture of the piece. I say her because in addition to the intended feminine gesture, I have purposely given Variant feminine proportions. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, one of my creative intentions has been to recognize and celebrate the current rise to power of women. To emphasize this further, I designed the base to present Variant as heroic. First, I have to design and fabricate for the practical function of the base, which is to secure the sculpture at the optimal height and desired orientation. A footplate cut to closely match the bottom shape of Variant's foot is set to determine the height. The threaded rod that is screwed into Variant's foot passes through a hole in the footplate and is secured from beneath inside a void with a washer and nut. The void within the base is fabricated first. It is topped with a channel and the footplate. Ensuring the footplate's orientation is perfectly level with the bottom of the base is imperative. Without getting this right, Variant's center of gravity would be off. With the footplate's orientation set properly, each piece is welded in place. I then begin fabricating the much more artistic and creative upper surface of the base. As I said earlier, I want the presentation to have a heroic feel. To accomplish this, I designed the base to symbolize a rocky hill, somewhat derivative of the Iwo Jima War Memorial, an iconic symbol of heroism and victory. The entire process of fabricating the bronze rocks is much like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, and similar to playing chess, as I have to see many moves ahead. All pieces are initially tack welded in place. When the final structure is complete, I create purposely sloppy and textural welds, giving the base an organic feel. A final check is done to see if Variant is able to maintain her center of gravity. Finally, to complete this project, I apply patinas to Variant and the base and seal both with paste wax. I thank you all for your interest in my work and for watching this episode of Gallery Talks with Craig. I'm hoping by now you would like to see Variant completed. So until next time, remember that the visual world can bring as much inspiration, invigoration, and joy as music brings to our ears. All we have to do is look. Here she is, Variant.